Over the last decade, we've seen a number of female come and go in pro wrestling. Some were around for a short time, some lasted a while, some made an impact on the business, and some helped change the way that people look at women's wrestling. Just like Trish Stratus, Lita, Beth Phoenix, and others did in the early 2000s, many have helped usher in what we now call the woman's evolution. Before and going into this last decade, many people just saw women's matches as mud matches, pillow fights, bra and panties matches, and basically cat fights. Now, in 2019 and going into this next decade, women's wrestling is looked at as much more than that. Now, it is looked at as it always should have been looked at. Women now get to go out there and put on great matches that sometimes rival what the men are doing. Women even get to main event on television, pay-per-view, and more specifically this past year at WrestleMania. Hey guys, it's Tim and this is Pro Wrestling Unlimited. So we asked you guys to give us your suggestions on who you thought were the best female wrestlers over the last decade. We took your top 5 suggestions, we had you rank those 5, and now here they are. Starting with number 5, it's PAIGE with 6% of the votes. PAIGE may have the second most experience of all the women on this list, and because of that, it may be why her career was cut short. As a young girl in England, PAIGE grew up in a family of wrestlers but never actually wanted to be a wrestler herself. That was until her father was a girl short for a show he was putting on and put PAIGE in the ring. From then on, it was all she ever wanted to do. PAIGE would wrestle around the world for about 6 years before catching the eye of the WWE. In 2011, PAIGE signed with the WWE and debuted in January of 2012. It was not long before she was the top woman in WWE's developmental brand, NXT. Ultimately, PAIGE would go on to become the first ever NXT Women's Champion. She did so in a match against Emma, where some say that match may have kicked off the women's evolution. But at the time, many did not see the match. The two women were allowed to go out there and have the type of match that they wanted to have and were given the time to do so. They didn't have to have the normal 30 to 90 second matches that we were all used to seeing on Raw and SmackDown. From there, WWE was all in with PAIGE, even having her win the WWE Divas Championship on her first night on the main roster, defeating AJ Lee. PAIGE would go on to have a great feud with Lee over the championship. Some say they stepped out of the shadows and showed everyone what women can do when given the ball. Over the next few years, PAIGE would go on to become a 2-time Divas Champion, with Rolling Stone even naming her the best female wrestler in 2014. Unfortunately, in 2016, that is when it all went wrong for PAIGE. On August 3, 2016, her mother took to Twitter to reveal that she was out of action dealing with an injury. A few months later, PAIGE ended up undergoing neck surgery. It was said, though, that she was not having career-ending neck surgery. It took about a year before PAIGE was able to return to the ring, but that came with a warning that one wrong bump could cause her to suffer another injury. Only a month after returning, PAIGE was in a multi-woman tag team match at a live event where she was kicked in the back of the head by Sasha Banks and went down to the mat hurt. PAIGE says that she does not blame Banks for injuring her, but PAIGE has not worked a match ever since. Since the last injury in December 2017, we have seen PAIGE still remain with the WWE and absolutely kill it as the general manager of SmackDown. WWE briefly had her manage the Kabuki Warriors, and now she is a regular on Fox's weekly recap show, WWE Backstage. PAIGE and her story had such an impact in pro wrestling that The Rock actually created a movie about PAIGE, her family, and her going from wrestling in England all the way to making it to the WWE and winning the Divas Championship from AJ Lee. If you haven't seen the movie, it's called Fighting With My Family, and it's absolutely great. Now, even though PAIGE's career was cut short due to injury at just the age of 24, like I said, PAIGE's impact on the business will be felt for many years to come, as she was somebody that was able to go out there in the ring. Whether it was with another seasoned vet or a newcomer, she was able to go out there and pull the best possible match out of that opponent as possible. Coming in at number 4, it's ASUKA with 12% of the votes. ASUKA, or to many who knew her before WWE, Kana, is considered not just one of the best female pro wrestlers in the world, but one of the overall best pro wrestlers of the last decade. Whether it was in Japan or in America, ASUKA has been able to put on some of the best matches you may ever see. Over the last decade, ASUKA is considered one of the best female pro wrestlers in Japan and abroad, working for Smash and Wrestling New Classic in Japan, as well as Chikara and Shimmer in the United States. Unfortunately, since in the early part of this decade and prior, most independent women's wrestling was not really widely seen as it is today. It was not till the second half of this decade in 2015 when the fans worldwide really got to see what ASUKA can do when she joined WWE. ASUKA was placed in NXT right when the NXT women's division was making a change. The women who helped build that division were all moving on to the main roster, and they needed somebody to be the person to keep that division in check. It did not take long after her September 2015 debut for her to become the NXT Women's Champion. It was roughly about 6 months after her debut where she would defeat Bayley for the title. Just a few short months later, WWE held a draft and ASUKA was heavily considered to be moved up to the main roster, but Triple H was able to talk Vince McMahon out of it, keeping one of his biggest stars in NXT. Triple H at one point would refer to ASUKA as the anchor of NXT and said that she was, I quote, the one person NXT could not afford to lose. ASUKA would go on to never technically be defeated in NXT and held the Women's Championship for an impressive 510 days before vacating the belt on September 6, 2017, before coming to the main roster. At the time, NXT General Manager William Regal actually called ASUKA, and I quote, one of the greatest champions in WWE history. After coming to the main roster at the end of 2017, ASUKA would then go on to win the first ever Women's Royal Rumble in January 2018. She would then challenge Charlotte Flair for the SmackDown Women's Championship at WrestleMania 34, and in what some call a horrible move, ASUKA was unfortunately unable to take the title from Flair, ultimately ending her undefeated streak in WWE. Throughout the remainder of the year, ASUKA would feud with Carmella for the title multiple times in losing efforts, and would also team with Naomi to take on the Iconics. It was not until the end of 2018 when ASUKA would finally find main roster gold, defeating both Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair in a TLC match to win the SmackDown Women's Championship. ASUKA would only hold the title for roughly 100 days before dropping the belt to Charlotte Flair. Since then, ASUKA has formed a tag team with Kairi Sane, the Kabuki Warriors, and are the current WWE Women's Tag Team Champions. Some may say that ASUKA's time so far on the main roster has been a little lackluster, but it was her 3 years in NXT that will make her, as Regal called her, one of the greatest champions in WWE history and one of the best female wrestlers of the last decade. Coming in at number 3, it's Becky Lynch with 14% of the votes. Just like Paige, Becky Lynch started training before she was even old enough to drive. As a teenager in 2002, she began training in Ireland and worked around the world for 4 to 5 years before suffering a bad head injury. As a result of the injury, she took 6 years off and wrestled only less than a handful of matches before being recruited by WWE in 2013. During her early years in NXT, Becky Lynch, for a lack of better terms, floundered. Her character changed multiple times, and at times you didn't know if she was working as a heel or a babyface, even at one point aligning herself with Sasha Banks. It was not until 2015 when Lynch finally started to come into her own in NXT. Lynch was involved in a 4-way title match at NXT TakeOver Rival with Sasha Banks, Charlotte Flair, and Bayley. Lynch didn't win the title, unfortunately. Lynch would then earn herself another title shot, this time at TakeOver Unstoppable, debuting a new look and having a match with Banks that received widespread praise for both's work in the ring. In July of 2015, Lynch, along with Charlotte Flair and Sasha Banks, were called to the main roster to begin what Stephanie McMahon deemed the Women's Revolution. Over the next year, Banks really started to come into her own on the main roster, and at WrestleMania 32 was involved in one of the best WWE women's matches of the last decade in a triple threat match with both Charlotte Flair and Sasha Banks. It was not till later that year, after being drafted to SmackDown, when Lynch finally really found success. In the draft, SmackDown was left without a women's champion, and Becky was crowned the first ever SmackDown Live Women's Champion. Over the next 2 years, Lynch would win the SmackDown Women's Championship 3 times, but it was not till summer of 2018 when Lynch finally found who she was. Starting at the 2018 Money in the Bank pay-per-view, Lynch would go on a little winning streak, winning multiple matches leading up to SummerSlam, where she would be in a triple threat match with Charlotte Flair and the champ Carmella with a title on the line. Flair would win the match by pinning Becky Lynch, and then after the match, Lynch would attack and beat down Charlotte Flair. Over the next few months, the two would feud over the championship, with Lynch adopting the moniker The Man. That fall, Lynch was supposed to face Raw Women's Champion Ronda Rousey at Survivor Series, but was injured on an episode of Raw prior to Survivor Series after being punched in the face by Nia Jax and suffering a concussion. She was then unable to work the match at Survivor Series. Lynch would return to action just following Survivor Series, where she would drop the title to ASUKA at TLC. Lynch would then go on to win the 2019 Women's Royal Rumble, and on her way to WrestleMania, became the most popular star in the company. Lynch would then go on to main event WrestleMania against both Raw Women's Champion Ronda Rousey and SmackDown Women's Champion Charlotte Flair, with Lynch pinning Ronda Rousey and winning both belts. Since WrestleMania, Lynch has remained the Raw Women's Champion and is still by many considered one of, if not the most popular, female in WWE. At only 32 years old, Lynch could be considered just entering the prime of her career. The Wrestling Observer newsletter named Lynch the MVP of 2018, and Pro Wrestling Illustrated named her their #1 female wrestler in the world in 2019, and there is no reason why she can't win either of those accolades again. Coming in at number 2 at Charlotte Flair with 27% of the votes. Just like Paige, Charlotte grew up with a pro wrestler for a father, and she originally had no intentions on becoming a wrestler herself. Her younger brother always wanted to follow in their father's footsteps and started training, but unfortunately passed away in 2013. It was not long after when WWE recruited Charlotte, and she decided to give it a shot in honor of her late brother. Flair signed with WWE in May of 2013. When she first started with the company, she was simply known as Charlotte, as they kinda wanted to slightly distance her from her father Ric Flair. We see how that went. She was positioned as one of the top female heels in NXT rather quickly, and we slowly started seeing her embrace her Flair name and break out on her own. Flair had her breakout match against Natalya in May of 2014 after Paige had to vacate the Women's Championship in NXT. Flair and Natalya met in the finals of her tournament, and Flair admitted that she was very nervous going into this match, and Natalya helped her every step of the way. Just like Paige and Emma before them, some marked Natalya versus Charlotte as the start of the women's evolution. While in NXT, Flair would go on to feud with Sasha Banks and have some really standout matches until they were both called to the main roster with Becky Lynch in July of 2015. They were called up as part of Stephanie McMahon's Women's Revolution. And, yeah, not long after coming to the main roster, Charlotte would adopt her family last name, Flair. Charlotte was quickly positioned as the standout of the 3 NXT women who were all called up to the main roster, and it was not long before she was in the hunt for the Divas Championship. Flair would go on to, just a couple of months after debuting on the main roster, win the title from Nikki Bella at Night of Champions. Flair would hold on to the Divas Championship for quite some time and defend it in a highly rated match at WrestleMania 32 against Sasha Banks and Becky Lynch when the title was rebranded the Women's Championship. Over the next year, Charlotte would rekindle her old feud with Sasha Banks, competing in Hell in a Cell, a Falls Count Anywhere match, and a 30-minute Iron Man match, all majorly praised. Flair would finally drop the title to Bayley in early 2017, and shortly after WrestleMania was moved from Raw to SmackDown. During her 2-year run on SmackDown, Flair would win the SmackDown Women's Championship 5 times, pushing her total reigns as a champion to 10 reigns. Charlotte's fourth title reign came this past spring when she defeated ASUKA for the title going into WrestleMania. Flair would end up main eventing WrestleMania with both Becky Lynch and Ronda Rousey, and yeah, Becky Lynch picked up that victory. After WrestleMania, Flair took a brief hiatus, and then when she came back, she started calling herself the greatest female superstar of all time. This would then lead to a match this past August at SummerSlam with WWE Hall of Famer Trish Stratus. Flair would come out victorious. Charlotte's last title reign came just a few months ago where she would beat Bayley at Hell in a Cell, but only hold the title for 5 days before dropping the belt back to Bayley on SmackDown. Charlotte is still relatively young at the age of 33 and has many years left to catch and even pass her father's record as a 16-time world champion. And coming in at number 1 is Tessa Blanchard with 41% of the votes. Tessa Blanchard is another on this list that comes from a wrestling family, but her story is a little different than the others. Her grandfather was a wrestler, her father was a wrestler, legendary Four Horseman Tully Blanchard, and in 2005, when she was only 9 years old, her mother married legendary wrestler Magnum TA. Tessa has talked over the years of having a great relationship with both her father and stepfather, and both had a hand in her training. Blanchard is the youngest woman on this list at the age of 24 and has the least amount of experience, starting her career in 2014, but even with that, her being at the top of this list shows how hard she has worked since then. For the first 3 or 4 years of her career, Blanchard worked a number of independent promotions like Shine, WSU, Rise, and Lucha Underground. She also did some work early on for WWE, competing in a handful of matches on NXT and competing in the first ever Mae Young Classic, being eliminated in the first round. WWE had multiple opportunities to sign Blanchard, but it was always said that she had a slight attitude problem early in her career that may have kept WWE from bringing her into the company full time. And as the saying goes, everything happens for a reason, and as we've seen, Tessa not going to the WWE may have been the best thing for her. It was not till the latter half of 2017 and going into 2018 when Tessa really found who she is in the ring and started to become more widely known. In early 2018, intergender wrestling was really starting to become a thing, and Blanchard had a match for Wrestle Circus with Brian Cage that was widely positively received by many. Not long after that, she would sign with Impact Wrestling and debut in April of 2018, and that is where her career really took off. If you can say over the last few years that there was anybody who joined Impact and became a major star because of it, Blanchard would be that person. Over the first few months in the company, Blanchard would win the Knockouts Championship and held it for roughly 5 months. While in Impact, Tessa also joined WOW Women of Wrestling, an all-women's wrestling promotion, and became the champion there in Season 1, holding on to the title till dropping it on the Season 2 finale. Back in Impact, Tessa started a feud with Gail Kim, and this is when people really started to take notice of not just what Blanchard can do in the ring from bell to bell, but what she can do on the mic and in building up to a big match. Blanchard would go on to defeat Kim in her retirement match, and Gail Kim praised Tessa Blanchard for her abilities in the ring and called her the future of the division. Little did she know, Blanchard would, no pun intended, branch out and start working with the men in Impact Wrestling. At Slammiversary, Blanchard took on Sami Callihan in the first ever intergender match to main event an Impact Wrestling pay-per-view. It also may have been the first intergender singles match to main event a pay-per-view by any major wrestling promotion. Tessa also has worked for AAA this year and won a tables, ladders, and chairs match, winning the Women's Championship, or what they call the AAA Reina de Reyes Championship, in her first match with the company. In Impact, Blanchard would continue to feud with Sami Callihan and OVE throughout the remainder of the year. At Bound for Glory, Tessa would become the first woman to ever compete for the X Division Championship, but in a losing effort. Last month, though, Blanchard would go on to win a gauntlet match and become the #1 contender to the Impact World Championship. Blanchard will now move on this coming January to challenge Sami Callihan at Hard to Kill for the Impact World Championship, where many do believe she can win the belt. As we stated before, Blanchard is the youngest woman on this list, and at the age of 24, still has many more years ahead of her to continue what she's doing. Tessa has been said to have broken down barriers and shown that women don't just have to wrestle the women, but can also go in there and compete with the men as well. So with that, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of PW Unlimited's The List, the top 5 female pro wrestlers of the last decade voted on by you, the PW Unlimited community. Let us know what you guys thought of this list, where everyone was ranked, and who you maybe thought should have made the list and who you would have taken off instead. But that's going to do it for this episode. Remember to comment below, like and share this video, like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and subscribe right here on YouTube.